Hey, good morning. I'm actually not doing this at night. I decided to do this in the evening because I've just been reading about this and putting the slideshow together. So usually I say good morning, and I'll post this in the morning, but for me it's actually in the evening. So maybe this just a little something different. Like I said, just because it's so fresh in my mind. So I'll say this all now. Lesson five, a focus on Abraham Lincoln, who was a president of the United States during all of the Civil War, and then also something called the Emancipation Proclamation. So if after you're done with all this, you have no idea what the Emancipation Proclamation is, do me a favor. Send me an email or rewatch all of this, reread this, and hopefully it'll be clear to you. So, Emancipation Proclamation. To proclaim something, to say it out loud, to write it, and emancipation means freedom. Okay, so obviously we're talking about freeing slaves, but it doesn't end slavery. Okay, slavery was ended in this country with the 13th Amendment. The Emancipation Proclamation did something a little bit different, so let's talk about it. The first slide here, Abraham Lincoln's original goal. It was not to end slavery. Okay, in my opinion, as the junior historian I am, I think Lincoln is sometimes given too much credit for being an abolitionist. He's not John Brown. He's not William Lloyd Garrison. This is not somebody whose every ounce of his being was dedicated to ending slavery. He did far less than many of the people that we talked about in our last unit. So that's not to say that he was in favor of slavery, but as president of the United States, his main objective, and he said it several times, was to keep the country together. Right? He said it then as his first inaugural address in the winter spring of 1861, and he said it even here, this part that's highlighted in yellow, in August of 1862. If I could save the Union without freeing any slaves, I would do it. Okay, so that kind of says where he's at. However, the war is not going well for the North. Now, there haven't been tremendous Southern victories. We talked about the Battle of Bull Run. A couple of the larger Southern battles actually happened in the spring of 1863. We're not quite there yet. But the North isn't winning, right? George McClellan, the general of the Army of the Potomac, hasn't scored any massive victories. And so not only is the war not going well, the war's not going well, and there's kind of a loss of support in the North. People are thinking, wouldn't it just perhaps be easier or even better to let the Confederate States go on their way, and then the two places will just operate as these separate countries. Lincoln, of course, does not want to do this. He wants to preserve the Union. And he feels that freeing slaves in the Confederacy might be something that he is able to do with the Emancipation Proclamation. However, he can't do it not having any military victory. So in September of 1862, he has a military victory at the Battle of Antietam. Now, it's an incredibly bloody battle in, I believe, September 17th, 1862. Incredibly bloody, incredibly destructive. And it's sort of a Union victory. It's not an out and out Union failure, which is kind of good enough for Lincoln. So he decides that he's going to push forward with the Emancipation Proclamation um, because it gives the North now a moral reason for victory. Okay, and it kind of says it down here in this paragraph. Instead of simply fighting and spending millions of dollars and tens of thousands of lives fighting to keep the South in the country, now you're fighting for what many thought was a more moral reason, which is to end slavery. If the North wins, slavery will be abolished and the millions of slaves in the South will be free. Okay, so that's a reason not to give up. So it changes the objective for fighting. Um, as we continue on, the Emancipation Proclamation. So it was officially issued the first day of 1863, but it only freed the slaves living in the Confederacy. Okay, even though he's president, presidents do not have the power to end slavery. That's something that the Constitution has to do. That's why there was the 13th Amendment. However, because the Confederate States were in rebellion, right, they tried to separate themselves from the rest of the country. This was seen as Lincoln had the ability to free the slaves there through through the powers he had, because he called it a military action. It didn't free many slaves, though, because you have to think the slaves that are in the Confederacy, well, what access is there for those slaves to acquire their own freedom? They can't just wander off the plantation, right? That's not going to be allowed. However, as the war continues on, and remember we talked about the Anaconda Plan, as the South loses ground over and over, day after day, week after week, to the larger Northern forces, then more and more slaves are going to be free. And there were certain parts of the end of the war where you had thousands of newly freed blacks who were basically following U.S. Army around because they really have nowhere else to go. The Ken Burns documentary again does a wonderful job talking about this. It's 7 minutes long. This little clip I included here, but I can't recommend it enough. Continuing on, this is a map of what the Civil War looked like as far as the states go. You'll notice, right, California, Oregon, they were states, sort of skipping over some of these places that were still territories. So the blue states did not have slavery. The red states are the Confederate states, and of course they did have slavery. These border states, Missouri, Kentucky, West Virginia, Maryland, and Delaware, they had slavery, but these states chose to remain part of the Union. This was another reason why Lincoln only pushed to end slavery in the Confederacy, because had he issued some sort of decree, lawful or not, ending slavery everywhere, what do you think Missouri, Kentucky, Maryland, Delaware, what do you think they're going to push to do? They're going to push to perhaps join the Confederacy. So not only did perhaps Lincoln not have the ability to end slavery everywhere by presidential action, he also may have lost those states to the Confederate side. So that's another reason why he didn't want to do that. If you go back to this one, it also mentions dissuade European countries. Because there is now a moral reason for fighting, and that is if the Union wins, America will no longer have slavery. For European countries, France, England, maybe even the Netherlands, they're not going to be too keen on supporting the South, right? Being their trading partner, giving them direct military aid, because now it's not just that the South wins, it's that slavery continues. So for England, which had banned slavery in, I believe, 1833, for France, which had banned slavery in 1848, Netherlands were a little bit late to the party as far as banning slavery goes. But especially for those first two, um, you're not going to support the side that supports slavery. Now, indirectly, there were some kind of hijinks that goes on, especially because the South does have all that cotton. But you're not going to give direct military aid to the South because that would be seen as supporting the side that favors slavery, which many countries had thankfully already abandoned. Just the United States was, like the Netherlands, a little bit late to the party. This was a quote taken from. Let me move myself down here. This was a quote taken from the 7 minute clip from the Ken Burns doc that I thought said it very well. It wasn't attributed to anyone, so I assume it's just from a relatively nameless Union soldier. But I thought it was very powerful. It says, "It was no longer a question of the Union as it was that was to be reestablished. It was the Union as it should be. That is to say, washed clean from its original sin, that being slavery. We were no longer merely the soldiers of a political controversy. We were now the missionaries of a great work of redemption, the armed liberators of millions. The war was ennobled, the object was higher." I just thought that was a really powerful part of that video. As far as questions for this go, there are none. They will be included in the quiz, which I would encourage you to go take a look at now once you finish the reading more carefully, and once you watch the clip of Ken Burns. There will be no typical Thursday quiz. Tomorrow I'm going to talk about inflation and Jefferson Davis, which is actually kind of interesting. I think you'll get a lot out of that, especially for those of you who enjoy to view things in numbers and maybe have a good math sense. What else I want to say? So finish the quiz. It'll cover lessons 3, 4, and 5. There won't be a typical end of the week quiz on Thursday. Instead, it'll be today, which for me right now was Tuesday, but for by the time I post this, it'll be Wednesday. All right, everybody. I hope you are continuing to do well, and I will